Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. This most recent build over on the PTR for the patch 11.1 brought in even more class changes with some fairly sizable revamps. Basically a lot more quality of life improvements regarding talents, and even more importantly, a ton of changes based on community feedback, which is something we love to see here on this channel. Players getting to test some of our classes heading forward for the next season, and the Blizzard making adjustments based on the community's feedback, which is the best way to shape our classes going forward. So far, this build's focus has been on priests, hunters, and the class of mage. Most importantly, one of my favorite playstyles of mage with the Arcane getting juiced when it comes to its barrage gameplay, and so many now different overlapping components of the barrage ability, which can actually give it some earth-shattering damage output, which is super fun to play around with. So for today's video, I really wanted to take some time to focus in on my all-time favorite mage spec heading into Season 2. As always though, if you guys want to see more class overviews, previews, and revamps for the patch 11.1 ever on the PTR, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe. But otherwise, let's dive right in. So mages are getting a bunch of new toys this time around for the newest build of the patch 11.1. Especially with a fairly decent focus on the spec of Arcane, which is, or at least used to be, my all-time favorite playstyle. It started off very good at the very beginning of War Within. The popularity of the spec, however, over time slowly waned. They did see a slight rework with some of the newer talents for the patch 11.05, or maybe it was 11.07, but those talents and changes may actually somewhat contributed to the further decline of the spec. Plus further adjustments for Fire and Frost definitely springboarded them forward a little bit, solidifying their dominance for the Season 1. Though they are trying their very best for patch 11.1 to bring back Arcane, so to try to see if they can potentially retain some viability with some brand new talents, but also them trying to make adjustments based on community feedback. But the question is, does it actually hit the mark? Which is something I just do want to talk about. Now, what are the newer talents that have been brought in? There's a bunch of new talents being brought in for Arcane Mage. Hell, the talent tree itself on the right-hand side even saw a bit of a restructuring overall, especially over the last few builds. But one of the big things I wanted to do is take this Season 1 tier set of the War Within, which I felt was influential enough and added enough gameplay to Arcane, and turn it into a talent, which is not the worst. I actually like this a lot. I really wish they did that with more specs, specifically Outlaw Rogues, because there was some awesome TRSs that played around Roll the Bones mechanic to reduce or even remove some RNG out of Roll the Bones, which were amazing. And there's plenty of other specs that had really good consequential talents throughout expansions, like not specifically BFA or Shadowlands, because the TRSs there were a little iffy, but Legion, they're heading into like and the Shadowlands, that all throughout Dragonflight, there were some really interesting additions all throughout all those expansions. But for Arcane, the tier set of Intuition, because the talent where casting damaging spell has a chance to make the next Arcane Barrage deal additional damage. This could be for the modified actually, baseline 20% up to 40% additional damage, causing the barrage to also generate 4 arcane charges. This overall is just a random damage proc, and the way that it works and the way that it seems to want to function is it has a chance to spawn or a chance to proc for your character anytime you use any ability, and it seems like it's an ability the one for you to use immediately as soon as it's made available. So you'll just keep barraging, and as soon as it's up, it only lasts for a few seconds, but it is above that you can actually overlap with other things like Nether Precision as well to achieve some very decent damage out of the ability, which is, in my opinion, kind of interesting when you think about it. Could potentially be very good because there's a bunch of buffs that it could overlap together with and deal quite a bit of damage without any contributing buffs or anything like that. But if you wanted to combine with things like Nether Precision, that's a nice little combo, or if you're Sun Fury, Burden of Power, or Glorious Incandescence, that's additional damage stacking overlap in events there as well. Plus there's also a bunch of other talents to buff out Barrage, but this is an interesting one that adds a little bit more, a little bit less control to your rotation, because you can't really control when the proc happens. But what it does, and if you can overlap it with some of the other buffs, it does allow you to more aggressively use barrages while still retaining all of your resources. They wanted to try to keep it light in terms of the duration of the buff, because they don't really specify the duration here, but they even have a little blue post quote where the buff is meant to be short in order to help motivate mages to do less min-maxing around it and just send the barrages. But if you are looking to maybe get some overlapping buffs, there is opportunity for it, but they kind of want it to be a really easy to use ability without too much cognitive load, which I think may be better for some of the new players trying to pick up Arcane mages. Maybe that is the angle there, but I personally like overlapping a bunch of buffs myself, and I think there's opportunity for there as well. Then there's also other talents as well here, like Arcane Rebound to play around with Barrage ability, where if Barrage hits more than 2 targets, it then explodes for additional arcane damage to all enemies within 10 yards of the primary target. Technically uncapped AoE damage, but I feel like the numbers are a little undertuned, but I kind of like the idea, and it's placed further down towards the bottom right of the talent tree, and this whole bottom right section has actually gone through a number of changes, where maybe we'll see mages running Arcane Rebound in the future, but time will tell. Below the gate talent of Barrages Savant, which has you really focusing on that mastery buff towards Arcane Blast and Arcane Barrages that eventually leads into the playstyle of Lay Drinker, there's quite a few talent changes in order to make the bottom right section a little bit more considered, and a lot of players started to play it as well. Below that is a new choice node that either can be Lay Sight, which is a new, but it's a new choice node, the fact that Lay Sight actually has a competition in the same node, where either you can increase the effectiveness and other precision from 20% to 30%, or Aether Fragment, where Intuition's damage bonus is increased by 20%. What's weird about this, however, is technically you could actually talent around not picking up Intuition, but still take a talent that buffs Intuition, which is a little bit uncomfortable. I think they need to adjust it to maybe pull Intuition a little further up, so it's a little harder not to pick up this talent. But yeah, it's a little bit of a quinky-ding that they got going on here, which is something you should try to avoid, but technically, if you're not paying attention, you could make a bit of a blunder, so they may need to adjust the position of this talent if they want it to be a core ability as part of the Arcane playstyle. Talents like Resonance have been adjusted a little bit in an unfortunate way. Arcane Barrages deal 15% increased damage per target it hits beyond the first. Previously, it would just be a damage buff for every target that it hit, including single target, but now it's mostly just a cleave talent, which I guess is nice. What they wanted to do with the Resonance and some of these AoE talents with Barrages is they wanted to double down on Resonance AoE components and cleave potential and opportunity for mages to be able to pick other single target talents while using Barrages their cleave and AoE capability. I guess if it's a mages don't want to play around Arcane Explosion for cleave, but they want to play around the short cleave of Barrages, where that'll be kind of how they offset a lot of their AoE while still have priority single target damage for the rest of their kit. I get what they were trying to do, but I kind of miss Resonance being decent in single target as well as AoE. I feel like there should definitely be some kind of bonus, like a passive damage increase plus additional per target or something like that. Another challenge that wanted to make sure that it's a lot better as a capstone is Lay Drinker, which has been updated through a variety of different buffs that actually got quite a few players playing it as of this week. Lay Drinker triggers from consuming Clear Casting, where Clear Casting is a 40% chance to make a next Arcane Blast Echo. This is mostly adjusted so that Clear Casting allows you to get Nether Precision, but Clear Casting could also proc Lay Drinker, so then your next Blast is going to be empowered by Nether Precision while also getting the benefits of Lay Drinker, so these two effects will overlap more than likely. The echo damage increase from 60% to 70%, which also is incredibly noticeable. It actually does a decent bit of cleave overall, and apparently its visuals have also been updated, which when it comes to my testing out in dungeons, I didn't really see a visual change, but you can see that the Lay Drinker Echo is actually significantly better in terms of just the raw damage compared to where it was. So we got a Lay Drinker proc right now, and with an Arcane Blast, you should see the effect of it. Has a little bit of this cleavy effect with these missiles coming down from left and right. So you can actually see a slightly different animation for this one as well, which is kind of interesting looking. But the changes to Lay Drinker actually make it somewhat usable if you want to play mostly a cleave-based build or like a big Arcane Blast build with a high priority single target damage. And this may make certain talents like Consortium's Bauble maybe a little bit better, or maybe allow you to go less into the whole Arcane Barrage build, possibly for resources, just so you can spend more time blasting at your target. There's definitely a lot of different theory crafting builds going on right now, but at least it opens up an opportunity for Lay Drinker to be a lot better overall. Besides this though, they did end up improving the damage of certain mage-based abilities like your Arcane Explosion, for instance. I feel like sometimes I don't ever get to use the ability because it's just not really that necessary. They did end up buffing its damage by 35% to hopefully make it a little bit better. High voltage, a bad luck protection talent has also been buffed up by quite a bit, where the bad luck protection chance is increased to 15% up from 10%. And they also removed the mechanic from Arcane Mages based on community feedback, that is being the talent of Aether Vision. Aether Vision has been removed, and Aether Vision, if I can pull it up right here, the way that the talent used to work is so: consuming Nether Precision with Arcane Blast increases the damage of your next Arcane Barrage by 10% and causes it to generate 2 Arcane charges, stacking up to 2 times. So it would kind of try to simulate that original Nether Precision clipping loop that Arcane Mages used to do, where they would be able to get 2 Arcane Blast and a Barrage all empowered by Nether Precision, but they kind of wanted to make it its own standalone mechanic instead of technically a bugged element about Arcane that a lot of players just got to utilize and use, and actually added some complexity and depth into the Arcane Mage. And they kind of kept the bug in game because players enjoyed that kind of gameplay, but then they try to kind of add a talent to, while removing the bug, add a talent that kind of supports the bug in a similar way, but it just didn't quite work out. So that whole Aether Vision is just removed entirely, and they try to replace it together with Intuition to hopefully be a little bit better of a setup where Arcane Mages is less of a scripted playstyle, but rather there's a big burst window, a big burst incentive with Intuition and how that functions. But in their comment they said, basic community feedback for Arcane heading into 11.1. They wanted to remove Aether Vision. They will continue to monitor the spec and its playstyle and damage, and will adjust the complexity of the Barrage conditionals if necessary for the future, since Barrages on ability is a fairly cornerstone ability for Arcane Mages. On one hand, this change does end up simplifying some of the conditionals for Arcane Barrage to make Arcane Mages play a little bit easier, but it doesn't quite hit the mark with what the community really wanted to change with Arcane Mages to bring back that satisfying playstyle, where a lot of mages actually want Nether Precision to go back to its bugged version, where you could double dip both an Arcane Blast and a Barrage to consume a stack of Nether Precision, but like a single stack. So basically the way it used to work is you would just spam, let's say, Arcane Blast until you get yourself a clear casting proc. Once you get a clear casting proc, you get 2 stacks of Nether Precision. Your first Arcane Blast would consume the first stack. Then the next Arcane Blast, you would follow up immediately from Arcane Blast into a Barrage, where both of those abilities would consume the stack of Nether Precision. And a lot of players liked that gameplay loop a ton. And a lot of players, in fact, missed that gameplay loop a lot. So I almost feel like maybe they should bring that back, because I personally did like the gameplay loop also, because I still do have some elements of Nether Precision. Like, Nether Precision still can be consumed by Barrage if that's how you want to do it, if that I say you want to play Arcane Mage. But right now it just seems to be a mechanic where it just doesn't quite hit in the same satisfying way as a lot of mages would want it to be. So I wonder if potentially they could go back and adjust Nether Precision to go back to its double dipping roots. Just bring that mechanic back in the game and then adjust the spec around it, because for many players this felt like a very natural way to play Arcane Mage with Nether Precision. It added a little bit of skill, it did add a little bit of nuance to the spec, but it also gave it a very unique flow that was kind of enjoyable when it comes to tracking your buffs. And Nether Precision buff tracking wasn't even all that difficult either, because it proc with every single one of your clear casting windows, and it just gave Arcane Mages a very specific flavor. That being said, the changes that they've made for Arcane Mages so far aren't terrible on their own. There's actually quite a lot of additional ways for you to be able to synergize some of that Sun Fury and Spellslinger gameplay with some of these newer talents. The addition of Intuition and how that can be buffed up by Aether Fragment gives you a fairly chunky window to really amp up the damage of the Barrage, together with Nether Precision and the way that they changed up Blade Drinker. It actually synergizes for some decent AoE options and makes the whole bottom right section of the talent stream a little bit better. Certain things like Arcane Rebound probably needs to be tuned a little bit because the damage does seem a little low. I mean, what, we're hitting enemies for like 1 million with some of our abilities bare minimum, so hitting enemies for like 85,000 uncapped Maybe any big AoE trash packs might be really good, but who knows really. But there's enough little synergies here, and this is only just the baseline Arcane changes, as there were even additional Sun Fury buffs on top of it in order to make Barrage builds very potent. But Sun Fury playstyle, they are trying to really amp it up because Spell Slinger seems to be a fairly dominant choice right now, so they're trying to make Sun Fury a little bit better. For Sun Fury, they're doing a number of changes, like Burden of Power can now also buff the barrage damage, not just your Arcane Blast damage, which is another layer of overlap for Arcane mages to synergize together. So technically, Burden of Power together with Nether Precision, 20% damage increase, 40% damage increase from Intuition at the same time. If you could overlap it together, that could technically be a very strong window. Plus, Sun Fury already has this natural barrage synergy with Sun Fury Execution, where damage of bombardment can be even further higher when the enemies are lower health together with Arcane Bombardment. I mean, it's just a fairly sizable combo. But they also buffed up the actual capstone of the Sun Fury as well for Arcane with Memory of Alarm. With Arcane Soul, it now additionally causes each cast of Arcane Barrage during Arcane Soul to further increase Arcane Barrage's damage by 15%. And this seems to stack, or at least right now it seems to stack, every single time you barrage with your mage. So as you got your little bird ramping up and doing damage on its own, it actually deals a decent bit of damage. I haven't played with the bird, it feels like in a while, but once the damage of your Arcane Surge runs out, you can actually have a fairly chunky damage window with barrages where you can just keep spamming it over and over continuously again and again, and that damage actually keeps ramping up with every single barrage that you keep using. Just to make sure I get to show it off properly in order to show off the buff correctly, you can see that the damage of it is amping up every single time I press barrage. It goes up and up and up and up. I kind of missed it, but it looks like it got to 5 stacks or so. If you're hasted, technically you can get yourself a little bit more barrages in there as well. Those barrages can benefit from all these random procs that you can get throughout your base gameplay and also throughout the execute window. So those barrages can actually do quite a lot of damage, and they're fully empowered barrages where every single one that you cast has max arcane charges behind it. So there's a lot of potential for this mad execute, like hammer gameplay out of Arcane, which is fairly exciting. And it looks like they're kind of focusing on a bunch of different ways for you to amp up the damage of the barrage through fairly powerful damage combinations. So while on one hand, Aether Vision has been removed and they don't quite restore Nether Precision back to how it was, they are amping up the damage of barrage through a variety of different factors. Another thing that I noticed, and this is more anecdotal, is I feel like over the last few weeks on PTR, I barely saw any Arcane mages. It's been mostly Fire mages and a couple of Frost mages because Blizzard was doing 100% more damage for one reason or another until they ended up nerfing it. But I feel like I've been seeing a lot more Arcane mages this week specifically. Just about every single dungeon I go into, because I've been doing a bunch of class testing, especially with some of the newer dungeons, I feel like there's a lot more Arcane mages when I do see mages in my groups, which doesn't necessarily reflect the trend that we saw with Arcane mages, at least when it comes to PTR log testing. There's just not that much Arcane representation generally. But just so far this week, it feels like a lot of mages are hopping on the Arcane and are giving it a go, and some mages are seeing some fairly decent numbers based on some of the early tuning. But it does seem like at least there's an uptick of Arcane mages, which I think if anything is probably a really good sign. Speaking about Fire mages though, it looks like Fire mages and Frost mages saw very slight additions, with Fire mages catching a few nerfs as of recently. Fire started off very strong so far in PTR. It's performing really well, so they're actually doing some downgrades for it. Your 2-sat now is going to reduce the cooldown of combustion by 2 seconds instead of 3 seconds. Not the most consequential change, but it is going to be something that will kind of cascade off of it. But also the duration of your hyperthermia is also being, or at least the proc rate is now being reduced a little. They didn't really exactly say by how much, they just said trigger rate reduced, and that's really about all they said. But the Spec of Frost, they made a bunch of changes last week or over the last few weeks when it comes to talents, and apparently a bunch of them got reverted. That's all they said in the blue post, is a bunch of talent changes that did from last few weeks just straight up reverted. With talents such as Wintertide going back from a single talent point cost to a potentially 2 talent points cost. So little things and little adjustments when it comes to that talent point economy, but nothing super consequential. Although as Spellslinger, they did adjust Frostmage quite a decent bit in terms of your overall damage performance. The bonus damage from the Frozen Orbs from Spell Frost teachings took a bit of a hit. used to be a 30% damage increase, now reduced down to 15%, though it looks like they're trying to bolster it through other means. Like all splinter damage, all taps to splinter damage for Spell Frost is now buffed by 20%, but also apparently Ice Lance damage while Spellslinger is also buffed up by 20% as well, just for picking up the hero spec, unless that is a typo, but that's what it seems like in the blue post. It's just a straight up buff to Ice Lance while playing Spellslinger. So maybe they're just trying to tone back on its overall AoE damage, but reinforce some of its single target damage through Ice Lance and splinters, while allowing that cleave and AoE, or rather like orbs are really good for AoE, but not as good for single target, where lances can hit multiple targets, so they're decent for AoE, but also very good for single target. Splinters can do decent AoE damage, but also very good for single target. So maybe they're just trying to take out some of the damage from one source to give them more single target output. Spellslinger. I like some of the mage changes. They didn't attach any kind of blue post for this one, so it's kind of like anyone's guessing it, honestly. But it does seem like there's some adjustments being made for Frost and Fire, though not near as much as some of the changes they're trying to bring in for the spec of Arcane. Now, as always though, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys did enjoy this update video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give this video a like. I would very much appreciate that. Also, join our Discord community where we'll be posting even more updates regarding the patch 11.1 over on the PTR over these next few weeks. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you think these changes will be enough to potentially swing it back for Arcane heading forward into Season 2? Let me know your thoughts, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.